Hey everyone, my name is Patrick Fingler, and in this tech tip video, we're going to take a look at some advanced KPI card configuration and how you can leverage workflows to update KPI cards dynamically to create some dashboard-like apps for your Geocortex Web applications. Let's dive in. All right, we're going to kick things off here actually inside of a customer application. So this is the City of Portland's permit metric map app application that they've built with Geocortex Web. And immediately you'll see here that they've added some KPI cards at the top. Now what's really interesting is as the user zooms in and out or pans the map, you'll notice that these KPI cards are being updated on the fly. Now what's happening in the background is essentially they've configured a workflow that fires every time the user pans the map or zooms in and out, essentially every time the extent of the map changes. And what that does is it queries all of these different layers. So there's a couple different layers inside of the app, and it will essentially query, and identify how many features for that layer are within the given extent, and then update the KPI cards accordingly. Now in this application here, these are different permits and they've been symbolized accordingly, but in another application you could have different assets and so on that you might want to display, counts and so on of. So how does someone actually build this? So let's navigate to Geocortex Web. And here you can see I've added some KPI cards, and I've purposely made this building's KPI card not fully functioning, so we can kind of walk through how to put it together. But here you can see that if we zoom in and out, we're going to be updating these KPI cards for the fire hydrants and the water lines. So it's essentially querying all of the assets within the given extent and giving us a count. And again, if we zoom really far out, it's going to give us a total count for all of the fire hydrants and water lines within the given extent. So to essentially build this, what you'll first need to do is navigate to the map tab here, and we'll scroll down, and there's an events section. So here we can scroll down, and you'll see here there's this map viewpoint changed event. And here what I've done is I've configured a workflow to fire every time the map's viewpoint changes. So again, what you'd want to do is you just click edit, you'd click workflows, and then you could click create a new workflow to start from scratch. And here I've selected an existing workflow. So let's walk through this process. So if we go into the workflow itself, there's kind of three main sections here. The first section is just to set up your workflow and define what layers that you want to generate some KPI cards on. The second step is to query those layers, and then the third step is just to update and run some commands to update those KPI cards. So in the setup container, it's again not too long of a workflow. What we're doing is we're using the get workflow inputs command. This is going to give us the current map extent. And here I'm just assigning this to a variable. So I'm doing get workflow inputs. We're getting the context. We're going into the maps object, and then we're getting the extent. Now this is one way to do it. You could also just use the get map extent activity, and that would also work just fine. The next thing that we're doing is we're creating this features array variable, which is going to hold the results of our queries that we perform. So this is a key step here. We've just created an empty object, which is an empty array. And then here, we're just essentially getting the layers that we want to include in our KPI cards. So I'm using the get layer activity, and I'm getting the fire hydrants layer, I'm getting the water lines layer, and I'm also getting the buildings layer. Once you have those layers, we can then query them. So here, let's open up our query layers container. And here you can see I'm using the query layer activity. I'm supplying my fire hydrants layer. Here, we're essentially wanting to identify all of the fire hydrants within the current map extent. We're just doing a 1 = 1. We don't want the geometry because you do want this to be a very performant query because it's running every time the user pans the map. And then one way to make that very performant is to use what are called out statistics. And this is a capability within ArcGIS Server. So here we can say we want to do a count. So this is the statistic type property. You can find documentation on this in Esri's ArcGIS Server documentation. But essentially what we're doing is we're doing a count. We're doing a count on the object ID, which is our statistic field, and then you can specify an out statistic field name. We're just going to set this to be also object ID. You could assign this to another attribute, but it's worth mentioning that you'd probably want it to be like an integer or a double. So here we're essentially doing a count, and we're essentially outputting a single attribute called object ID, which is going to have the count of the features within the current extent. And this same process we're doing for all of the other queries as well. So again, for the water lines, we're passing the water lines layer. We're querying it based on the map extent. And then we're also using that same out statistics object on our object ID. In between these, you can see here we're just adding the results of these to our features collection or features array. So here we're adding an item to our features collection, and this is just going to be the output feature from our query, which will just be a single feature that has that object ID attribute, which is actually going to be the count of the features. So we're doing that for all three layers. And then if we go to the update KPI container, let's double click that. And then this next step is important. So we're going to convert that features array, which contains Esri features, into what's called a vertiges feature. We do have other tech tip videos that I'd recommend watching if this is new to you, so definitely check those out. But essentially what this process does is it uses this operation, results.fromGraphics, to convert these Esri features, which is our features array object, which are called graphics. And that will output a vertiges feature, which we can then use for other native Geocortex Web commands and operations. Here we're going to run a command called kpi.display, and this is where we're going to supply the vertiges features. Again, check out our tech tips. There's lots of documentation on our developer center to learn more on how to use those. Now, let's just, again, save that. That's essentially the workflow. Let us know. We can always upload this to the community or something like that if you want to get access to it. But that's the general workflow. Now, in regards to the KPI card configuration, let's go to our buildings KPI card because it's not working properly. So here I've added a KPI card, and I've connected it to our buildings layer. This is, I've adjusted the coloring of it so it is, purple, and I've just added a little, some text here to say buildings. And then if we look in the middle section here, this is where it's this value property is essentially going to be the value of the count or attribute that we want to include in the KPI card. But really the key step here is we're going to click sum. And you'll notice here the object ID field isn't being listed in here. And that's the output field that we've configured in the out statistics. So let's go to advanced mode and then just update this to say object ID. So we're now doing a sum and we're getting the object ID. And then so now here, if we go zoom in and out, we now have some KPI cards that are nicely configured, that are very fast. It's not really taxing our ArcGIS server too hard, and they're including some counts based on the features within the given extent. So I hope you found that valuable, be sure to reach out if you have any questions. Bye for now.